What's going on, guys? It's Alex from Learn to Code London here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make your web pages look cool by applying CSS styling to your web pages. You can check out the full tutorial series by following the link in the description of this video. You can also navigate to learntocodelondon.co.uk, and if you scroll down to the bottom of my homepage, you will find free online coding tutorials. If you click on there, then you will find all the modules in there, how to make your own website tutorial. Last time we talked about the secret most programmers won't tell you, which is all about discovering new information about HTML, new tags, and how to plug those in to your existing web pages and kind of learning things incrementally. So that was all about the process of learning HTML. And indeed, this approach can be used for any language. So make sure to check that out. So let's proceed to today's tutorial, which is all about making your web pages look cool using CSS. So let's just talk about very briefly the basics of web programming. So far, we've talked about HTML. HTML is providing the content, the data that we actually want to display in our web pages. You can think of it as a noun, okay? Kind of a descriptor, this is the content we want to display in our web pages, and we've talked about HTML in the previous modules. So if you're not clear about HTML, do go and check out the other tutorials, the articles on my blog and the supporting YouTube videos. CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets, provides the styling or format or how we want our web pages to actually be displayed. You can think of CSS as being an adjective. It describes the noun, it describes the HTML. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this module. There's a third component, which is JavaScript, which we'll be covering in a future tutorial. And this is kind of the most advanced of the three technologies. And this provides the dynamic elements in a web page. Without JavaScript, our web pages, even styled with CSS, will be pretty static. And we can think of JavaScript as being a verb, which describes action. And this brings our web pages to life. So we'll be covering JavaScript in a future tutorial. So combine those three together, HTML with the content, the data, the pure, data, as it were, that we want to display in our web page, so all the text and all the images, etc. And then CSS is all about styling, how we want it to look, the formats we want to apply, the layout, things like that. And the JavaScript providing the dynamic elements. So all of that together, gives us a modern day web page. These three technologies are also known as front-end technologies, front-end web development technologies. So you'll see this terminology being used. Okay. So CSS is a completely different language to HTML, and it has its own syntax, which we'll be covering today. We're currently on version 3, and you'll see people referring to CSS 3. So these two kind of acronyms are interchangeable, CSS or CSS 3. Now you might ask, why do we separate CSS from HTML? We've already learned HTML, why not just put the format into the HTML file and be done with it? Well, keeping it separate allows HTML to focus on the content, the data, and leave the formatting and styling to CSS. This helps to keep HTML files small and concise. And this is a concept applied a lot in software engineering. Keeping the data and the presentation separate brings a lot of advantages, as we will see. So for example, we can use a single CSS to define a style of a whole website, not just one web page. Remember, a whole website is made up maybe of dozens or hundreds of individual web pages. If we had styling embedded in each HTML page independently and we wanted to change that style, then we would have a pretty massive job on our hands. However, if all the styling is contained in one place and we want to change the whole website, then we just need to change our CSS file. And that's really the main benefit of keeping it separate. So let's talk a little bit about CSS syntax. So I'll just copy and paste that example of the syntax into my text editor so you can see it clearly. So in our CSS, we'll be using selectors and we'll be using properties to define our style. So the selector will be selecting the HTML elements that our styles will be applied to. So these property value pairs will define things like colors, fonts, spacing, margins, things like that. Okay, so let's take a look at an example. So this is an example. Just make that a tiny bit smaller. So in this example, our selector is h1, so our header 1, and then we open this curly brace and close the curly brace to show that this is the start and this is the end of the actual styles that we want to apply to header 1. So in this case, we want to make header 1 green. So we want to apply the color. The color is our property, and the value of that property is green. And then in the next declaration, our selector is P, the paragraph. We start the declaration of the style, we end the declaration of the style, and in this case, we want to apply the color red. So let's see that in action. So to do that, let's go back to module 2 and just grab our very basic Hello World web page. So we're just going to set that up, create a new file, copy and paste the code, make that a bit smaller, file, save as. We're going to drop it onto our desktop. We're going to call it index.html. If this isn't clear, please do check out module 2, which will explain how this all works. So if we find our HTML file on the desktop, it's there. If we drop it into a new tab, like so, then we'll see that there's no styles being applied because there's no association between this HTML file and our styles that we've defined here. So what we need to do, we need to save this as, you can call it anything you like. I normally call it style.css. You can call it anything you like, but it should have the extension .css to identify it as a style sheet. So if we save that onto our desktop, then it should appear somewhere. Where's it gone? Let's have a look. Is it behind here? No, I'm not sure where that's gone. Oh, no, that's not it. All right, let me just find it. Desktop style. Save, replace. Oh, right, it's here. Couldn't find it for a second. Right, okay. Back on track. So at the moment, we still don't have an association between this style CSS file and this HTML document, and we need to establish that link. So we're just going to go back to our module 5 tutorial. And we're just going to jump a little bit ahead, which talks about how to actually link these two things together. And the way we link it is using a link tag, which goes into the head section of the HTML document. So let's just make this a little bit bigger and format it. Okay, so the link tag has this format. It has a link, it has a type, which is style sheet. It has a rel, which is called style sheet, type, text, CSS, and then a hyperlink reference to our file, which is style.css. So if we save that and now refresh the page, then you can see here that our style sheet that we've defined here is being applied to our HTML document. So notice that this is the only line that links the two together. The HTML contains the content, the data, and the style.css file contains the styles that are applied to the HTML file. So let's go back and just have a look at what other things we can do. So CSS defines a number of colors which we can use in basically like in plain English. So we can write, yellow, for example, etc. And that will change it to yellow, although it's not nicely visible on a white background. But you get the idea. You can check out the full list of supported colors on this link from the blog here. We can also use hex. So hex is hexadecimal, and it looks like this. So for example, this hex represents the color gold. So let's put that back to green, and let's make this gold. So hex color always begins with a hashtag, and it has 6 alphanumeric, so like letters and numbers. And the way it works is each of these pairs describes the red, blue, and green components. If you want to learn more about hexadecimal, there's, Google is your friend. It's basically a number system in base 16 rather than decimal as we know it, which is base 10. So do read up about that. Hexadecimal does come up in software engineering quite a lot, but I'm not really going to focus too much on it in this tutorial because this tutorial is all about styling. Okay, you can also use a tool like colors.io. colors.co. So you can generate, if you're stuck for color choices, I recommend this tool. You can kind of just browse through, click generate a few times, and it will generate different color schemes, and you can then plug those into your CSS styles. So for example, perhaps I like this one, so I'll just copy that, put that there, save that, refresh my page, and it's made it kind of this red color. Okay, so that's what you can do. You can use a plain English color, or you can use a hexadecimal color, and you can use a tool like colors or coolers even. It's called coolers.co to get your hexadecimal number to plug in. We can also define fonts. So to define a font, you need to import it first in your CSS file, and this is how you would do that. Let's make that a bit smaller so we can see. So this is how we would do that. So in this case, I'm importing from Google the following font families: Holtwood 1, Source Code Pro, and Able. And then to apply those to a particular element, we would do that. So if we refresh that, you can see the font has been applied to our H1, our header in the HTML file. So that's how fonts work. So you've got this @import, and then you've got the URL, and then you basically list the fonts that you want to import, separated by pipes. So if you go to this website, so Google provides a huge library of really good looking fonts, and that is not the URL. If we go to google.co.uk and then type in Google fonts, then you'll find here a very big library of fonts that you can use in your CSS files, essentially. So do check that out. It's a great resource. The way we are applying the font is using the font family and property. And then notice here how we're listing not just one font, but a list separated by commas. The reason for that is, should the browser not be able to load halt would want SC in this example, then it will fail over to Arial, and if it is unable to load Arial, then it will fail over to a font called sans serif. And sans serif should be present on every operating system. It's the kind of default font that is always available. So this is how you would declare it, to just make sure that there is a font applied in a kind of failover fashion. Let's continue on. We can also define margins and padding to kind of space our elements out. So if we want some more spacing around H1, we can do it like this by applying padding. So basically saying apply some padding on top of the H1 element of 20 pixels and 10 pixels to the right, 20 pixels to the bottom, and 10 to the left. So if we save that and refresh it, then this should become more spaced out, as you can see here. So maybe I want to pad more at the bottom, maybe I want 100. And that hasn't worked. Why not? Because I'm missing a semicolon there. Yep, that's the reason. So you have to be a little bit careful, always follow the syntax. It's very easy to make a typo, just a simple typo like that. So do take your time and make sure you're continuously testing. So make the changes, test things out, and kind of incrementally build up your source code. That way, you're going to reduce the likelihood of introducing bugs. There's also a shorthand for padding. So if you wanted to apply the same padding to the top, right, bottom, and left, then you can simply do padding, for example, 200, and then delete that and refresh that, and then that creates a big 200 pixel padding around your H1 tag. So it's really cool to kind of play around with the layout and see what cool effects you can do. It does take a little bit of an eye for design, but by all means have a good play around. Let's continue on. You can also define font sizes, font styles. You can apply styles to the whole body. Remember, the body tag encloses everything that is visible within a web page. So if I want to make my background green, then that's how I would do that. If I want to make it red, for example, then that's how I would do that. So it's really fun to play around with and see how you can lay it out. You can also style links. So you can say a visited link, you want it to have the color red. An unvisited link, you want to have the color red, and so on. When you hover over, the color will change and things like that. So you can get an effect that you can see in this code pen that I've shown here, for example. So again, we can basically take this style, plug it into our CSS file, and start messing around with it. I'm going to talk a little bit about different selector types. So far, we've used the element selector, where we're selecting the actual tag that we want the style to be applied to. So we're saying body, we're saying H1, we're saying P, and then applying the style to those tags. This is called the element selector. We can also use what's called the ID selector. So in that case, we would need to prefix our selector with a hash. So I'll show you how to do that. So if we put hash first paragraph, we want it to have this color. If I do that and save it, then let me just remove the body. I'll also show you how you can easily remove styles. So you can use this comment syntax. Anything between a sort of slash and a star, and then a star and a slash is a comment. But you can also comment out blocks of code to prevent them from being applied. So let's remove background red by commenting it out. This is very useful. So for example, at the moment in this file, I've got the P element. If I use my element selector and I apply the style to, I use P, the element selector, then it will apply the style to this tag here and make this text red here. Now, if I put hash first, for example, and this here you can call anything you want. I can call it Alex. Okay, if I save that, then this style will not be applied to this element because it doesn't have the right ID. So the ID selector will only be applied to element with the same ID. So the way you do that is like that. And you can see there the text goes red. So in this case, we're using an ID selector which is prefixed with hash. It can contain any word, whereas the element selector needs to match the tag exactly. So here we have hash Alex, and then we've put ID equals Alex as an attribute on the P element, which causes this style to be applied to this particular P. Okay, so the ID attribute should be unique. No two tags within a single HTML page should have the same ID. And there's flexibility here. So if we wanted to apply that style to the H1 tag, we can do. We just simply say ID equals Alex, refresh that, and in this case the style's been applied to the H1, to the header. Okay, there's also a class selector. So a class selector can be used, so if an ID selector is used to apply effectively style to a single element, because you can only have one tag within an HTML web page with a particular ID, then a class selector can be applied to multiple. So if we define this class, for example, red, and then apply class red to our P as well, and then we define this as dot red. Save that. Then hopefully we should be right. I'm missing an S there. Save that. That's why. So in that case, we're basically styling both the header and the P with the same class called red. And the reason it's a class selector is because it's got a dot. Okay, so if we go back to our tutorial, so those are the three selector types. Now that might be a little bit confusing. You know, it's a case of having a bit of a play around with it. The first time I saw it, it confused me. So I might have covered that a little bit fast in the interest of time. But, you know, take a bit of time out to read through the content and have a play with it, and it will make sense. The key thing to remember is when you're using an element selector, you specify the HTML tag. When you're using an ID selector, you're prefixing it with hash and then any word, and that will reference the tag with that particular ID in your HTML document. And when you're using the class selector, you're using dot, and that will apply that style to the HTML elements using that particular attribute in the class. It will apply the style to those elements that have class equals whatever your word is there. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky to explain. Have a play around with it. I think for the initial period, I would certainly recommend that you use the element selector because that's the simplest one. The ID and the class selectors are kind of more advanced. So start playing around with the element selector, see how you go, and that identifies the elements that the style will be applied to. Okay. Hopefully that's clear, but have a play around with it and let me know if you have any questions. So there's also 3 methods of applying CSS to HTML. So the one that we've been using at the moment is the recommended and is the best method. And this method is to use the link tag to make the association between the index HTML and the style. It's absolutely the best and the most recommended. There is also an internal CSS method to associate style with an HTML document. In this case, we don't have a separate CSS file, and we use this style tag to actually put style directly into the head section of the HTML document. This is less recommended for obvious reasons when you have many HTML pages making up your website, and you've got style elements in all of them, then it becomes unmanageable. Okay, but I'm covering this for completion. You can do this if you've got a small amount of web pages. You can certainly use this method. And the other method is called inline. And the way you do that is you can use the style attribute on any HTML element to apply style to it. So if I delete everything I've got in my style, so I've got no style being applied, and then I basically apply the style directly on the tag by using the style attribute, and I say style equals color green, save that, refresh that, the header goes green. Okay, so again, this method is less recommended, because your style will be mixed all over the place in various HTML files and it will become unmanageable. So I recommend that you use the external CSS file, which is what I've covered for majority of this tutorial, and use the link tag to make an association between the HTML and the CSS style. This keeps the content and the styling completely separate, which is best practices for in general. Okay, so that's the end of that really. So let's have a look at one final example, kind of bringing everything together. We're going to borrow the example that we showed in one of the previous modules, which was the kind of skating board website, Retro Skater. So if I just grab that HTML, refresh it, then I've got a very boring looking web page which doesn't have any styling. So I've written some styling for this page just to demonstrate the key kind of takeaways, if you like, from this tutorial. So I've got my HTML, I've got my link to my style CSS here, my style CSS is here. So if I refresh that, then it's starting to look pretty cool. I mean, not everyone will agree with this color scheme, but I think it looks pretty cool because the skateboard's orange. So I've gone for that kind of black and orange look, which I think looks great. And the link is styled kind of this cyan color, I guess. And when you hover over it, it turns orange. I've got my horizontal rules styled in this kind of thick white, and the image is styled as circular. So I'm just going to touch on a few pointers in the CSS file, and again, you can have a look on the blog post, which is linked in the description, and have a play with it yourself. But I'm just going to touch on the key points. So the key points here are, we're importing the fonts from Google Fonts library. We're applying font family to the whole body. We're using this new thing called text transform. So we're making all the text uppercase. So if you notice here, it's all capitals. and then we're applying color and background using hexadecimals. And then again, you know, we're using padding to space things out. We're using font sizes. We're applying this particular style to the H2 and H3 elements, and so on. For the image tag, we're applying a border radius 50%, which creates this really nice circular effect, and so on. So there's some examples. We're also applying styling to our anchors. So when we hover over the anchor, it changes color, which obviously just makes it a little bit cooler, a little bit more dynamic. If you go to the web page linked in this tutorial and click through to the code pen, then you know you've got a playground there. You can change the HTML, you can change the CSS style and have a play around with this example and take a copy of it. Feel free to use it, so make sure you have a play around there. Okay guys, that was pretty, oh, one more thing to note. Note that the only difference between, you know, if we take this out and save it, the web page becomes like that. So that's the pure content. And if we put it back and save it and refresh it, then the web page, you know, really starts to look like something interesting. Okay, and again, you need an eye for design here to make things look cool. So I'm sure you'll come up with maybe better designs than what I've come up with. If you do, then do share them. That would be pretty cool. So that's pretty much it really for this tutorial. We've covered CSS and the key different selector types, how to create an association between the style and the HTML document, and a recommended method of doing that using an external file. We've also introduced things like Google Fonts and colors and color pickers and stuff like that. So hopefully there's a lot of good ideas there. Feel free to experiment. Just a word of warning, CSS is quite hard. You need an eye for design, and there's also kind of cross-browser compatibility issues which you may face. So it might work really well in Chrome, but not so well in Internet Explorer or Firefox. So be aware of that. And in a future tutorial, I'll be covering a way to kind of get around those issues. So stay tuned for that. So I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe for more Learn to Code content, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.